Hi, everybody. Good welcome. Good welcome. I meant to say welcome. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully you can hear me. If you can just see my mouth moving and you can't hear me, then please do let me know on the chat. Thank you for putting that lovely smiley face in the chat. I can see that. That's very nice. So welcome to this webinar on the importance of data in product safety. I am super excited about this webinar because it is one of my favorite subjects, in addition to risk assessment as well, and a few other things. So data is definitely one of my favorite subjects. We will get started. It's on the hour now, so hopefully everyone's here that needs to be here, but this will be recorded. I will introduce myself in a moment, but just to go through a few housekeeping things. Please actively participate. We will have a Menti, which will hopefully work, but if it doesn't work, never mind. We are risk assessment professionals here at ICW, so we have a backup, so don't worry. But we really appreciate active participation because it makes it more interesting for you, but also for me. I don't feel so alone if you have some active participation. So please do use the chat for any queries. This will be recorded. So if I don't mention your name personally, it's nothing personal. It's lovely to see some familiar names there. So hello to all of you. I just don't want to mention those specifically because it is being recorded. But please do put any questions in the chat. If you have any questions, you can direct them to me so no one else sees them if you prefer, or you can just put them in the chat for everyone else to see, and I will try and address those throughout the webinar. We have 45 minutes today, so 45 minutes of fun talking about data. I will present for about 30 minutes and then try and leave about 15 minutes for questions, but happy to do that and interject throughout the presentation because you might see a slide that makes you think of a question that you want to ask there, and then please do that. I just need to make sure I watch the chat and watch you as well. So I'll try and answer those questions when they come in. If not, we'll get to those at the end. Your line should be muted anyway, but please just do check if it's not, if somehow you've slipped through the net and you're not. And any queries, if you don't want to address them to me in the chat, then feel free to email the amazing ICW team at emarketing@ICW, which I've put in the chat. I'll be putting lots of information in the chat today, so lots of links, because I want to share with you everything that I do in 30 minutes with data and some tips and tricks that I have. It's not everything. There's a lot more out there, and I'm sure a lot of you can share some things as well, which I want to get to on the Menti. So please do share if you have anything with regards to data you think other people will be interested in. But quickly to introduce who I am, in case you don't know who I am. So my name is Geraldine Cosh. I am a product safety consultant based here in London in the UK. I've got nearly 20 years of experience in product safety. So I've been working in product safety for a long time, but I still learn every day. It's not something I've ever really, mastered. I don't know everything about everything. But I've been working in it for a long time and I thoroughly enjoy what I do. I've trained lots of people. I thought I'd throw some numbers in there, right? Because we like data, but lots and lots of people. And some recent activities. So I've worked on the ROSPA, which is the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents project on injury data collection, which was kindly sponsored by the Office of Product Safety and Standards, who are an amazing government department here in the UK. I'm going to, in case you don't know what I'm talking about when I mention these things, let me move these things out of the way. I'm going to put in the chat who OPSS are so you can follow their website. Hopefully this works. If it doesn't, someone else can put in the correct thing. But there you go. There's a link to the OPSS, the Office of Product Safety and Standards, and they've got some great data on their website and some great information. So I just wanted to share that with you. I'm also the technical author for PAS 7055, which is on button and coin batteries, and we definitely looked at data when developing that particular standard, and that's in the annex. There's some data that we've shared in there. And I'm also the technical author for PAS 7100 and 7050, which was an absolute honour to work on those projects, and also for the SPEAK project at the European level, which was the safe non-food consumer products, which we definitely used data when we did presentations there and training. And then also worked on the CAST projects. One of those was specifically on injury data in Europe. So you can see where my experience and obsession with data comes from, just explaining who I am there and how obsessed I am with data. Okay, so just to let you know, this is the third webinar we've done this year. So the first one we did back in March. Quite generic, how do we look at legislation? Very important to understand the legislation applicable to your product. So I gave some tips and tricks on where I find legislation, and you might have some different ideas as well, but definitely a great webinar to have a quick look back on. And the great thing about the ICW team is they record all of these webinars. So in case you don't have time today, or you need to drop off, or you want to refer back to some things that maybe we've mentioned, they are all available on the ICW website. The link is there, and if you go to the ICW website, you should see it. You should also get an email with the link after this webinar. Do feel free to contact any of us if you haven't got any of those or you're having difficulty. The recent session we did in May with Rutger Oldenhaus, who is awesome. He is a person based in the Netherlands, and he did a presentation on GPSR. Great webinar and really informative on the new GPSR that's coming out in Europe. And then today you've got me talking about product safety data and how that's important for product safety. And just for little dates in your diary is September the 20th, if you're free, is to talk about another one of my favorite subjects, is risk assessment. So we asked you what you want to hear about, and you said risk assessment. So we deliver here. And then also in November the 7th, on November the 7th, sorry, will be cosmetics. And the wonderful Amanda Isom, who is a cosmetics expert, will be presenting that webinar in November. So highly recommend you keep an eye out for those and add them to your diary. So what are we going to cover in the next 30 to 40 minutes? We are going to talk about why. What's the point? Why am I so excited about data? And why do we need data if we work in product safety? What are the types and sources of data that we have available to us? And how do we use it? So now we've got all this data, how do we put that into practice, which can be quite overwhelming sometimes? So because I'm being a bit cheeky and a bit lazy, I'm going to pass it over to you. That's because I want to be interactive. I'm going to do a Menti now, and I want to ask you, what is data important for in product safety? So if you have data, what do you use it for? You know, why is it important? And this is an open word cloud, so anything that comes to mind. So what kind of data might be useful? And what types of data can you use? So hopefully, if you go onto if you scan the QR code, or you go to menti.com, so to scan the QR code, you just need to get your phone, open up the camera. You don't take a picture, but just scan the camera over the code, and then it should bring you to menti.com. And I just want to know, so why and what kind of data is important for product safety, and what types of data you can use. Now, hopefully this is working amazingly, because Menti has been very good for me lately. So I'm going to drag it over and let you see. Okay, so what data is important for product safety? Yeah, for comparison, issues, injury data, consumer complaints, return data, the bigger picture, comparison, to doing that benchmarking, definitely. And risk, for risk assessment, it is definitely really, really important. Okay, perfect. All the chemical data can be really, really tricky. Testing data. You've done my presentation already, right? Give you some tips, don't worry. Quality management, returns, issue, bigger picture. Okay, perfect. Wow, keep putting those in. I don't want to rush you. And I love these. I think they look very, very pretty. So what types of data can you use? So I'm just going to pull this over to the next one. It will just have to give you the type. You've answered it probably in the first one. I think we've got a good idea on the types of data. So looking at injury data, you mentioned, returns data, recall data is really, really important, definitely. So we've probably already covered these in the first one. But yeah, great. Pretty much aligned with what I'm going to be talking about today. So complaints, accident data, perfect. I'm going to put that to one side, and you can still continue to complete that. and I will, and Menti is anonymous, by the way, so if there's something specific on there, you have a question, you can put it in the Menti chat as well. But that's really useful for me to get an understanding of where you're at. So accidents, people have put it in the chat as well, maybe Menti wasn't working, or market surveillance is really important as well. So just understanding that market. So what's the point? Why are you here today, and why am I talking about it? I'm going to show you a little video very quickly that's really going to put this in perspective. The sound should come through. We did check it before, and it's just a little bit of music. So I'm just going to show you this quick video from NSC, the National Safety Council. I thought that was a really great video, just to summarize in 1 minute, when we have limited time, of why and what's the point and why do we care about data. I'd love to know, if you can put it in the chat, just what you thought about that video. If you thought, okay, I already knew it, not really telling me anything interesting, or just what struck out to you. And for me, I think one of the key things is the term preventable. And that's where I think we all want to make a difference. There are injuries that happen sometimes that may not be as preventable as we would like them to be. But I think when we're working in product safety, there are quite a lot of things that we can do to prevent injuries. And there's different ways that we can actually do it. Clyde, sorry, shouldn't have said the name, just the name out, so sorry. A gentleman in the chat has just said, surprised that most accidents happen in the home. And that's exactly one of the things that struck out for me. A lot of the focus will be on injuries that happen, you know, in different types of areas. Maybe we talk about motor vehicles or collisions, but the amount of injuries that happen in our home, you know, when we think of perspective, and that's really, really important. Actually, the stairs, walking up and down the stairs is probably one of the most dangerous things you will do in your life. So for a bit of perspective, I think it's very, very important for us to understand that the home is where a lot of these accidents happen. It's where a lot of the products that we're all involved in are available in the home. So there is a lot of things that we can actually do. And about preventable, the numbers are shocking. Yeah, agree. Very clear and shocking and very interesting. So yeah, have a look. The NSC website is really useful, the National Safety Council. It is US data. And I think the fact that, you know, the amount of deaths per hour and the amount of preventable deaths is really where we want to focus on. So how can we do that? How can we prevent these types of injuries happening? And when we have this high level data, I find it interesting, but I don't know about you, I ask more questions. Okay, there's these injuries or deaths that are happening in the home, but what types, where, to who? What can I do about it as a product safety professional? So then if we dig a little bit deeper, and this is available, and I love the way that they present the data. ROSPA have great sites, you know, the Child Accident Prevention Trust, there's loads of different websites and information and sources that are already out there that have these great visuals to help us put in perspective where we're sitting with our products. So if we're looking at here, they've got a chart that I just thought I'd take here. If we're looking at, you know, where do we focus? Children aged 0 to 4 have the highest injury rates. So children may be considered, you know, vulnerable. Injuries to do with soaps and detergents. Maybe if you're in that arena making these products, you want to understand, well, what is it about those soaps and detergents that's making it hazardous to the consumers I'm selling my product to? You don't want to be injuring the people that you're selling your products to. Television sets and stands, you know, how they can injure, and then cooking ranges and others. So just looking at the type of injuries that happen in the home. And someone's mentioned, yeah, candles and children. Yeah, candles and children don't mix very well, but candles can be very hazardous. So are there ways that we can design it? And sometimes they are inherent hazards, right? But I think if you're in the area where these injuries are happening, you should know about it, and you should know if they're addressable hazards or not. I think as a minimum, that is your responsibility to be able to do that. So if somebody says, you know, you're in that area of soaps and detergents, a lot of the injuries are happening because X, Y, Z, you then should know, well, is that something that I can do about, either as a designer, as a QA person, as an expert in this area? And I think that's very important. And then we want to get down to the line level data. And this is where some data sources, and I'll come on to that struggle, I want to know the descriptions around those incidents. So we had the incidents, the high level, right? There's all of these numbers of injuries that are happening, you know, 34 injuries per 1,000 population with television sets and stands. If I'm making televisions, what can I do? I want to know the descriptions. Is it because children are climbing on top of them? You know, pets are climbing on top of them? Is it because they're not attached to the wall properly? And then what can I do? And that's where we really need that line level data. And unfortunately, most of the time, we'll come back to that in a second, is where we have a lot of anecdotal data. So this here majority can be kind of considered anecdotal. Some of it is definitely more than that. But looking at these incidents when they're coming in, and it's important for us to understand if there's any trends. Is there something that's happening on social media? Is there something we can do to address these collectively and as well as individually as product safety experts? So I'm sure you know about some of these examples already, but I just wanted to highlight some of those. And I've used these a lot. So I had a client as an example who had an issue with lead in a jewelry item, and I sent them the example here with the Reebok recall that happened with a fatality due to the lead content in it. So it really brings that perspective of how hazardous some items can be or not be. So they're really great examples to be aware of and know about. The different types of data, you've already alluded to it, and you put some of it in the Menti and you've put some of it in the chat. But I just want to give you some examples that I think about. They're not the only examples, so just types. You've got injury and fatality data, which we know. We've got recall and notification data, because on the websites such as the SafetyGate or the Product Safety Database here in the UK or CPSC, they're not always recalls, they might be notifications, but still really useful data for us. Testing data is key and mandatory in some places for some things, but testing data, what we can do with that. So I'll give you some examples. Research, I love research. I think if I could read research every day, all day, I probably would. Anecdotal, I think, is really useful. There's pros and cons, right? But we do get a better understanding about the circumstances around the event. But of course, we need to make sure that, you know, primary source research data is the ideal thing. But sometimes we just look at anecdotal and customer complaint data. That's really important. And depending on the product area that you're in, that actually might be a mandatory requirement in legislation that you collect that customer complaint data and really understand, is it something that you can do about as a designer or as a manufacturer or economic operator, whatever role you play, or is it something that is, you know, non-addressable, as we mentioned before. So there might be other types as well. So I'm going to very quickly talk about these different types of data in the next few slides. So injury and fatality data, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. Also, one of my favorite databases is the CPSC NICE data. And what I'm going to do is I need to close a few things over here, get around a few of these boxes I've got open. I'm going to put the link in. Probably most of you know how to get this, but I just want to share the direct link for the CPSC NICE database. And because it's an acronym, I want to explain what the acronym is, and the acronym is in the link as well. So it's the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and it's the National Electronic Injury Surveillance System. You can download the Excel spreadsheet for every single year of the data that's collected in that database, and it's from a number of hospitals around America, and it's specifically focused on products. It's phenomenal because it also provides that free text context around how these injuries are happening. So if you're having discussions with your colleagues, with your teams, you know, why are people injuring themselves on candles, for example, that's put in the chat, you can do a search in the database on candles and see where the injuries are most likely to happen. It's actually, I believe, with the elderly with candles, because I did an assessment before on that one. But you look at the data and have a look yourself and see on the type of injuries, and leaving them unattended, which you won't be surprised that people do. So you can get some great knowledge and information from this data. The US CPSC, so the CPSC is the US, United States. They also have something, they have safer products and the clearinghouse data, also a really good resource. Believe it has some of the deaths, in-depth investigations. Do you know what? I'm going to move the chat up a little bit out of the way, because I'm not getting the whole link now when I try and share that all with you. Make sure I send the right link to you so you get it. So you go direct. Hopefully that brings you direct. If it doesn't, let me know and I'll put it in at the end. And you can get some in-depth investigations, so death certificates. So there's a little bit more information in those clearinghouse data. You can get injury and fatality data from anecdotal data. So the anecdotal that I'm referring to, which is, kind of debatable, might be like newspaper clippings, as I've shown, that type of thing. So you can find out about injury and fatality data. We do have the European IDB. Unfortunately, I'm not sure. I think that's not been working for the last year or so, but it was a phenomenal database, and the team there are absolutely amazing. If anyone wants to know more about it, you can let me know, and perhaps I can put you in contact with those people. But that's the European Injury Database, where they're collecting data on injuries. Most of the data sources are actually wider than products, so it's more home and leisure accident surveillance systems. When we look at recalls and notifications, the US, the CPSC are very good on that. If there's been any fatalities, and some retailers, I think I've seen on their website, are very good with that and communicating any injuries or fatalities that have happened with their product. And I think that's really important for the consumer to understand the severity associated with it. So sometimes when you're looking at the recall notification, it will tell you about how many injuries or how somebody's injured or died from a product. Research is amazing. So you can study absolutely everything. One of the first things I did when I started my own business was I got access to the British Library. It's a lovely place in central London, in Euston. It's very quiet, but you can get research on absolutely anything. An example I just put there, because it's one of the articles that I have and I keep on file. I know it's from a while ago, but the principles are the same. So what this study looked at is the characteristics of objects that cause choking in children. So this is separate from legislation. What types of characteristics, shapes and sizes are likely to lead to a fatality or injury or choking. And that data is there. It's in these articles. It's for you to use. And then you can put that within your product design or your QA systems. And then, of course, customer complaint data is vital. If you're not monitoring that, you really should be. Some products you legally should be. So it's a wealth of data that you get from that information, and not only collecting it, but analysing it. And that's the key with data, is making sure that you get that. So I was asked a question is, when will we get an incident database in the EU? So that there is one in the EU. So there's the injury database. I just think the work has kind of halted on that. In the UK, we did, as I mentioned, I was working on a project, and I think, hopefully we might find out more about some more data sources that they may have in the UK, but it would be great. We don't have one in the UK at the moment that's actively around. So that's answering that question. And then, are there any sites that you need to pay to get data? And that's an interesting question. So I'm giving you some great examples on how you can get free data, but there are services where you can pay. So I think the EU IDB, there is a fee associated with that, but that would have to be confirmed with the team. And I did just want to mention some specific data sources that are out there. So Health Canada is actually, I'm not sure if it's available. There's some free information that's available. The Health Canada website is awesome. And they have, so the Regulatory Action Depot, the RADO, that they have the CHIRP system, which is phenomenal as well. And then they have their poisons database as well, really great resources. You might be able to access it. I can't remember 100% to check whether it's a fee or free, but they do provide a lot of really useful free information. And then there's something called the Global Injury Research Collaborative, who an old colleague of mine that I used to work with have set up, which is phenomenal, and is working with doctors not only on human data, but animal data, and collecting that. And I believe there's a fee if you want to access that. You'd have to collect them. You'd have to contact them directly to find out more about that. And I will put the link to the GIRC in the website, in the chat. And I will also put the link to the CHIRP database, which is really useful, the Health Canada one, in the chat as well. And there are other organisations such as NGM, another ex-colleague of mine that I used to work with, who is looking at all of this data can be really overwhelming. So how can they actually put it into a tool that's useful for you to be able to use for your specific product? And that's a really great resource. And this is just an example of some of the research that he shared with me on how they use that data and how they might use that to support their clients as well, and looking at different injury data that's available out there. So highly recommend having a look at NGM as well. And I'll show you some more examples from them in a moment. So recall and notification data, as I've mentioned already, sometimes it will tell you if there's been injuries, specific injuries. I think that the US are a lot better with that. The CPSC, it will say how many injuries in there. But another thing with this data source, when we're looking at data, is if I want to understand what legislation is applicable to my product. So I can see from this search on the safety gate, so the European database, I can see that I need to comply with the GPSD, the General Product Safety Directive, and with the standard EN 14682. So it's a really useful source of data to have a look at with the recall and notification data. So statistics are incredibly valuable, but sometimes we might get overwhelmed with the amount of statistics that are out there, and we need a bit of support with that. But they do really allow you to determine which processes or which parts of the manufacturing process is causing a problem. And it's really key for you to understand your manufacturing process. It's actually part of the conformity assessment process for some products, and I think it should be generically, regardless if you're under that conformity assessment process. And the Pareto principle, so the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the problems are caused by 20% of the processes, is you really want to focus, what's that 20% that you can really make a difference? And statistics can really help with that. And you can't possibly test all of your products, well, depending what product we're talking about here. But generally, for most consumer products, we're looking at, we want to get a good sample and a good representation of the production lot when we're doing some testing. So sample collection is really, really important, and testing data. Now we could do a thesis and definitely a whole day webinar on this one, but just to mention really briefly, which I think is summarized really nicely in the Office of Product Safety and Standards PRISM document, which is the risk assessment document that they've recently released. And again, you know what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a link for that in the chat. So that you can access that yourself. And if you go to section 5 of the PRISM guidance documents, it talks about testing and product homogeneity. And the example here is an example with tensile testing. It's really focusing on the European requirements here, but it doesn't matter. It could be any limit that you set yourself, whether it be 90 newtons or 120 or whatever you want it to be. And they've got an example here where you've got the test number, the sample number, and you've got the results. Quite often when you do testing, you'll get a pass fail, which quite often people are like, yeah, that's great, we've got a pass, let's not talk about it anymore, let's, you know, file that and off we go. It's really useful if you can ask the lab, and I've seen some labs actually do this without you asking. They'll actually give you the failure limit. So at what point is the product failing? And that gives you some really, really useful information. So here's it's saying here a good example, but I would question with this if you've got, you know, one result is 83 and one is 126. Sorry, they're saying a good example is in the EN 71, but if you've got a variability between 83 and 126, that's showing some variation in your production process. So you might want to focus on that and understand and tighten that. And obviously you've got some that are under the limit and some that are over. So you really need to understand of the 1,000 or 100 or 1,000,000 products you're making, where are they sitting? And that is where data is really, really valuable and really important. And I think not utilized enough by people, even though they should be doing it. So as part of your conformity assessment process for toys, for example, it's something you should be doing, but some people quite often stop with the, okay, we've got a pass fail, we're done, everyone's happy. But I think understanding product capability and having data on how capable your product is can be really, really useful. And it can save you time and money in the end, I'm definitely sure of that. So hopefully that was a good example and it made sense, and I highly recommend having a look at the PRISM guidance document, because it's useful not just for risk assessment but on other topics as well related to product safety. Just checking there's no questions now. I think I'm okay. Okay, so research data. What examples of research data? So again, I've mentioned here, my colleague I used to work with, he started up his business, NGM, that's really looking at focusing on data and what we can do with that data, how useful it is. And this is definitely a source that you have to pay for. There's the website there. You can contact him directly. He's looking at the moment as well to do with pets. So looking at canines, you know, they have different teeth, different physiology to humans, and they're definitely an area that I think we should focus more on, to be honest. I think the legislation is quite weak when it comes to products for pets. So research on various things is really useful, and that's where we get our data, where we use our data, and where it can help us focus where the risks may lie. Looking for chemical data. So I definitely go to the ECHA website, so the European Chemicals Agency, where you can search the CAS numbers of specific chemicals and see if they're in your product, where are they legislated, specifically under if it's, you know, REACH or POPs or what legislation. You can search the CAS number. So that data is really useful. I think I've already mentioned, so the Office of Product Safety and Standards, OPSS, really useful source of data, and the CPSC I've mentioned already. They do research as well, so these organizations have research which is available on their website. The HSE have really useful information, although that's health and safety at work. Here in the UK, you'll have equivalents in other countries, and they're a really useful resource for research where you may find injury data. And then, of course, the National Safety Council, which is where I showed you the video earlier, I think was really useful way of presenting data, which might be useful for you to present internally or use for your products you're working on. Okay, so how do we use it? Now we've got all of this data. First of all, we probably feel quite overwhelmed because there's so much data. So that's where you might want to target in, and specifically it depends. You need to prioritize, or maybe you need to work with an external person that can help you with the data. But I 100% use my data with risk assessment, and sometimes I need to get somebody else that can help me with that. But it really puts the perspective on the risk assessment. And I think, you know, when you're coming out with numbers, if somebody's saying to you, based on their calculation, you know, there's a 1 in 10 chance of somebody dying from a candle, just because it was put in the chat, it gives you need to have a bit of perspective. If you're looking at candle data, there's a National Candle Association, by the way, great data source, that will give you the amount of fatalities that happen per year. And if you're coming out with a risk assessment that's giving you a 1 in 10, that would mean every 10 person is going to die from a candle. So it, you know, looking at the data that's out of there, it gives you a bit of perspective. It helps you with the risk assessment steps, the scenarios, the probabilities. The injury data can really help with that, and other data to put in perspective consumer behavior and how they use things. It can help you understand trends, which you already put in the Menti. Develop ways to mitigate. So where can I reduce the risks that are associated with my product? Is it possible? Is this an addressable hazard that I found now here in the data source? And then you might want to use it for in-house test methods. If you find that, you know, your tensile requirements for the consumer behavior that's used on your product should be higher than 90 newtons, then maybe you want to apply that and talk to a laboratory and use that data to make it more relevant for your specific product. So other data sources which are relevant specifically here noted for risk assessment, but I think for product safety in general, is available again in the PRISM guidelines. So you've got things, the product safety database is the UK one, accident statistics, fire statistics, mortality statistics, the US database, the consumer safer products, as I mentioned, and the chemicals. And then I strongly agree, and I think that Google Scholar is a really useful way as well. And you might have other search engines such as PubMed, etc., that you can look for research. So this is all available, in case you forget what I'm saying, but it's all available in the PRISM. So that's just a screenshot from the PRISM guidance document, which I put in the chat. Okay. And then lastly, just to mention that I most certainly use data in my training. As I mentioned earlier, with the Speak training, which we did, which was training targeted at Chinese manufacturers, we used a lot of data to present that and give a bit of perspective. And I know that it's used in this training. So the Kids in Danger Toolkit, which is a phenomenal toolkit. I've been through this toolkit myself. Took about approximately 4 hours. You get a certificate of attendance at the end. It's free. Highly recommend, you know, if you're looking for, especially if you're dealing with kids products. It's very focused on kids products, but I do think it's it's relevant for no matter what product you're dealing with. And it gives you some information about how data is used as well in product safety. So this is a really great resource and it's free. So I wanted to share that with you, but definitely the training that I'm sure that if you pay for training with anybody, they'll be using data for that. And perhaps you can use it if you do any training with any of your colleagues. So that was kind of a whistle-stop tour through how I use data, some really useful data sources for you to use. But I definitely have to highlight is how we use data with the ICW team. So it is overwhelming, the amount of data, and I see this with my clients a lot. There's so much data, and where do they focus? What do they do? How do they store the data? And if I'm honest, I think that's probably 80% of a technologist's job is to try and sort all of that data out, try and chase for the data, try and get the information, store it and share it. And this is where the ICW system is so useful, because it provides a really useful way in storing that data, but not only storing it, analysing it. And fundamentally, at the end, it can help you save on testing and inspection costs as well. So this is just some examples of some of the dashboards that are available. So you can see this is just the product, and I like things when they're really simple. So you've got the product, you've got all the information related to that product, you can see it, you can get, if all of the information is in there, your test report data, where are you failing? Is it chemical compliance that's causing you issues with your suppliers? Looking at your vendors and who you're working with, your inspections, and also looking at, you know, various testings and products that you've had. Like I mentioned, where do you need to focus? Well, here they need to focus on, you know, they're spending a lot on chemical. That might be okay. Maybe there's other things that they can do across the board. What are they waiting for? Automatically chases the laboratory for you as well, so that you don't have to do that. So it provides really useful information on test performance, pass-fail rates, frequent test failures, and testing over a period of time relating to a specific supplier and their performance. So if you would like a demonstration of the ICW tool, you feel free to contact myself or anyone at the ICW team, and you've got the email below. But that's the presentation from my part done. I will quickly check and see if there's any questions in the chat, which I haven't addressed, but I don't think I missed any. So I think now is the time. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about my favourite subject. Yeah, so somebody's put in the chat about time, and I totally agree with you. And unfortunately, this is where you then need to get someone else to do it for you. So that's where ICW can come in and help you interpreting data, depending on the type of data, or someone like me, if you need help interpreting data. But you might need to get an external person to help you with the data. But I really get it. It can be challenging. Yes, somebody's asking about artificial intelligence. There's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of work going on. I know there's work at US level. I think I'll take that offline. And if anyone else is interested in that, let me know. But there is quite a bit of data out there. I think my opinion on that is that there's not necessarily specific requirements at the moment. There are some that you can follow with AI, but I think it's definitely work in progress. So I'm happy to share my thoughts on that if I catch up with you individually for AI. And it depends on the jurisdiction with artificial intelligence, definitely. Right, I don't think there's any more questions. So I think we will stop the webinar there. But thank you so much, everybody, for your time. Have a wonderful, safe day or evening, and hopefully we'll see you in September for our next webinar. Thank you.